to the podcast, everybody. The long-awaited recording of myself and Leonidas is finally here. Turns out it's actually his first podcast too, which is I find quite funny because hear this guy's voice 3-4 times a week on Twitter Spaces and the long threads that are posted. So I feel like I've known you in so many ways, but just me and you is kind of cool to finally get this done. Leonidas is one of the biggest leaders in the historical NFT community. He began contributing to the idea of NFT archaeology and history kind of right at the beginning of last year in 2021, and has emerged as the account with the most followers in the community and one of the largest voices. So glad we finally get to do this. Thanks for joining me.
Wow. Well, yeah, I'm really happy that you invited me on. It's an honor to be here. I've listened to many of your podcasts, and this is going to be fun. Like you said, it's my first podcast, so it's cool to be here.
Fuck yeah, my friend. It's weird because as I recorded or as I asked you to come on here, I was just like, what can I possibly talk to this guy about, right? Because we literally talk together multiple times per week. Like there's, right, of course you're anonymous. There's that, that pseudonymity to it. You voice your opinion and you're also a builder as well. So something that I don't think we've ever really got on recording is actually kind of just not the history of NFTs, but the history of Leonidas up to the extent of not doxing yourself. I've heard, but I don't know, haven't confirmed really how long you've actually been in crypto. And so tell us a little bit about your crypto story.
Yeah, great question. So to start, that's correct. A lot of people ask if I'm Greek or if my name's Leonidas. Unfortunately, my birth given name is not quite as cool. I'm just a fan of movie 300 and Gerard Butler. But so got into Bitcoin back in 2014 in my freshman year of college. And pretty much got into crypto in the same way a lot of people get into crypto. I saw this exponential price chart of Bitcoin and was like, this is drastically more exciting than, looking in the newspaper at the stock prices that I had done, the prior years back in like high school and middle school. So that was just like the initial draw. And then you naturally buy a little Bitcoin, get into, hey, like, how is this all working? And just go down the rabbit hole like many people do. Ended up dropping out of college a few years later and moved more in towards basically taught myself to code. So I'm a full stack JavaScript developer, worked at a few startups in the Bay Area, worked at a big tech company and did that for a few years. And then, I guess jumping back onto the kind of crypto timeline, I saw Ethereum kind of rising, got some ETH, and just kind of watched what was happening there. It was clearly very exciting. There was lots of just the ETH trader subreddit was extremely exciting at the time. Lots of energy, very much felt like the rise of NFTs in the past 2 years. So saw CryptoPunks get posted on ETH Trader and clicked into the link and, thought it was really dumb, right? Did not resonate with me at all. I thought this was just another novelty experiment. But then a few months later in December 2017, I was fortunate enough to be able to play CryptoKitties and breed CryptoKitties. And that's where it kind of clicked to me that wow, this isn't just about, trading currencies back and forth. Like there's more use cases for blockchain technologies than just currencies. So that was a super fun experience. It lasted about a week. It was a flash in the pan type thing, but quite fun and quite a eye-opening experience for myself. So then, if we flash forward a few years, didn't think about NFTs too much. I was aware that like OpenSea got built and just wasn't super into it. It seemed like there was a bunch of just clones of CryptoKitties. That was my kind of thoughts at the time. It turns out that's not the case. There's a bunch of really cool stuff that got built during that period. But it was around December 2020, January 2021. It started to get on my radar that NFTs were becoming an actual thing, right? It wasn't just this fun novelty thing. Like there's clearly something brewing here. So when I kind of realized in January 2021 that this movement, NFTs are a big thing. Like, the kind of stuff people talked about a few years before with CryptoKitties, like that's actually starting to happen, the things they were talking about. So I, of course, as the historical NFT nerd that I am, it instantly, my brain went to, hey, I'm going to go buy the two most iconic, oldest NFTs I know. The two oldest NFTs that I knew at the time were obviously just CryptoKitties and CryptoPunks. So I just went, bought a founder CryptoKitty, bought a CryptoPunk. And so from day one for me, the thesis around the earliest assets being highly collectible, and that the entire thesis around that just kind of clicked with me. I sorted through the market on like super rare and stuff and just, did not understand the market at all. So instantly went for older projects. And then with the thesis of just, I'm going to buy and hold these. And then, fast forward about 2 months and you have this Mooncat rescue moment. I was just listening on Clubhouse, saw that this Mooncat rescue thing was happening, tuned in, and I'm sure I probably heard, Adam and some other people talking on there, although I don't recognize their voices necessarily, but I'm sure it was a bunch of people that we now know today. You and I both know that we're probably on those spaces. And I was like, wow, okay. So in the last 12 hours, the project went from completely dead to $100 million market cap. That's pretty insane. And it clicked for me like, okay, like what are the odds that it's just Mooncats and CryptoKitties and CryptoPunks in 2017, right? So I hopped off my computer, I hopped off my phone, jumped on my computer, and instantly started Googling for old NFTs. And about 2 hours later, on like the 7th page of a Google search for, digital crypto art, filtered for the year 2017, I came across a project called Digital Zones of Immaterial Pictorial Sensibility by this guy, Mitchell F. Chan, who's an artist based in Toronto. And basically went down the rabbit hole like, this is really interesting. Went and tried to find the smart contract, started messing around with like Etherscan, right? Doing all the things that you do when you find a project now. And it all seems kind of obvious, but at the time I was like, this was all very new to me. So ended up getting in touch with Mitchell. It turns out that Snowfro, the founder of Artblocks, and this like CryptoPunk whale, Dave, had found the project before. And the way it works is it's coded into the contract, this bonding curve to release the tokens. So the last few had been purchased by like Snowfro and Dave. And there were like 70 left in the contract, but Mitchell would have to release them in like tranches whenever he kind of wanted to. And the price would go up on this bonding curve, right? So ended up getting in touch with Mitchell. And a few months later, he was able to get a wrapper together and did some releases of these. A lot of people in the NFT space got a message from me saying, hey, there's this cool project, like you should check it out. Like, ironically, these were not like necessarily selling out. Like I was able to get some, but there were many just sitting in the contract for like over a week and nobody was like interested. And I'm like, guys, these are old. These are 2017, and fortunately it was able to get a few people to pay attention. And Adam McBride ended up writing a Medium post about it. And that brought some attention and a few other kind of news sources at the time, I guess, like bloggers kind of covered it. And Mitchell went on some podcasts, and Mitchell's just super great dude. I mean, incredible spokesperson. The entire time he's talking, he's also educating people about the traditional art world and the connection to NFTs. So then fast forward, August 2021 rolls around, and historical NFTs are like, that thesis is now playing out in a major way, right? Like it's insanity. I would argue, it was Artblocks. It was probably Bored Ape Yacht Club and PFPs were starting to hit their stride. And then it was historical NFTs. And those three categories just saw insanity in August 2021. And you're showing the archaeology calendar here. It was pretty crazy that August month. Just so many eyeballs came across this idea of early NFTs being valuable, early NFTs being amazing for their collectability aspect. So tons of people just went looking on chain. Lots of things got dug up, from random forums of every corner of the internet. People found these things. And yeah, about a month later, I ended up quitting my job at the company I worked at in the Bay Area. And yeah, I've been focused on historical NFTs ever since. So that's the kind of short version of how I got it.
The Leonidas short version. It actually checks out because believe it or not, when we first went into this like massive bear market, and when I was doing research for this archaeology calendar, I began thinking about, okay, we're sitting now in an industry that's evolving around antiques, collectibles, historic significance, semantics, which we'll talk about, philosophy and stuff. And I'm like, okay, these people who are collecting are likely to stick around for probably the entirety of its history. And I started doing research on like Sotheby's and Christie's and looking like at those collectors, and those collectors had been around for a long time. So I actually started doing research on the people in our industry. I started going through your Twitter history, Adam's Twitter history, White Rabbits, whether it's ethical or not. Just curious to see the evolution of our own space, which has helped me put this together. And your first tweets actually were about digital zones. So that whole story actually checks out completely and fairly. And it made me really understand, like you mentioned, so you started collecting them end of 2020. And then during that probably 5-month period where you're chilling digital zones and telling everyone this is like a super iconic kind of historical artifact, which ended up being it and paid out pretty handsomely to that too. Though there was that like 5-month period that was pretty lost. And I think it was you coming and conforming to your own thesis of what this industry actually means and kind of the evolution. But now we're looking at it retroactively 18 months later. Has this has this formed into the vision that you had originally going back to May of 2021?
Yeah, I mean, so in the initial thesis really was like January 2021. I was like, okay, early NFTs, like this is a big deal. I just didn't realize there were more than like 2 or 3 or 4 of them. That was the kind of big surprise to me. But I've never questioned the notion that collectors are going to value these, basically historical artifacts, right? That they're not going to value them highly. It makes so much sense, and we can get into the reasons for why that's the case. But, I definitely have a reverence for these early pioneers that created them, a reverence for these assets. And yeah, I mean, it's very different to me than when I look at a project that got released last week. These are two quite different things. And that age and historical aspect is something I personally, as a collector, put a very high value on.
Yeah, it's good. It's been quite a freaking journey. And so this is the post from Adam, and I know you were in his comments as well, and everyone's comments kind of talking about this. So over the time, and I'm gonna go back up here, there were a lot of projects that were rediscovered, and I'm going to put a few more of these calendars out over time. And I have to give you props because I kind of started following yours and Adam's model of doing these like long threads and White Rabbits. And man, it takes a lot of effort to do these things. It took way, way, way longer than I had expected. But as this happened, there was some part where in the beginning of this journey, the historical thesis had a ton of credibility. It had a lot of like substance to it. And then it seemed like kind of like, maybe after this calendar, when September and October happened, there was some sort of credibility that was taken away because, right, we found a lot of 2017 projects in 2015, and then these like 2018, 2019 projects started getting rediscovered, and to the tune that some people that were now OG punk holders had been dabbling in these projects a few years prior. And to them, it's not historical, right? They had been experimenting with these just like 3 years before. And now punks are taking off. And they're like, this is just trash of like the yesteryears. This isn't anything historical. And so somewhere towards the end of the year, it kind of started losing its credibility. And maybe it was because things were getting pumped or people just didn't know how to really diagnose it. And as somebody who was that was helping this, right? Not just you, Adam, and all of us were kind of trying to diagnose the synopsis of like what these actually mean. During, we'll say September and towards the end of the year, how did you go about the excavation of some of these projects?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way I think about it is, you're going to find the lowest hanging fruit first, like, and then it's going to be basically a bell curve of value. I think a lot of people fall into this kind of framework of thinking where it's like, hey, you're either a CryptoPunk or a Rare Pepe or you're not. And I think the reality is the way these get valued, it very much looks like a bell curve. There's not just some drop off to zero value. And it's definitely a sharp bell curve. There's no question. But I think it's very, the relationship between that bell curve is largely to do with the total number of projects released in that period of time. So, there's 30 smart contracts roughly with NFTs in them from the 2015 through 2017 period on Ethereum, right? And then the space moved towards, hey, like, we've found these projects, but why shouldn't we look into 2018, for example? And you started to see, I guess it probably was around October of 2021, people just started looking further into, you're on the timeline here, started looking further into, what happened after CryptoKitties and, like what's in that time period. And I definitely think of it as like a bell curve. So if there's like, 100 or 200 projects in 2018 and, 50,000 projects in 2021, like you can kind of start to see this bell curve form where as NFTs become more of a thing, you get this CryptoKitties moment. Obviously people get inspired to go create projects, but it's, to me, exactly. It's like, you can see this explosion right around the time. Cause actually like that was the CryptoKitties release date, but like it was about a month or so before that they were, the team was kind of pushing the idea in late September. Actually, like Dieter Shirley has the ERC 721 post on GitHub, and then the CryptoKitties team is, I believe it was at like some hackathon up in Waterloo where they released this like beta version of CryptoKitties, and you can start to see like right around that time in like early October area, a bunch of people are really getting excited about NFTs, and it's just a bunch of people kind of see what's happening with CryptoKitties. And it kind of goes viral for a minute and then slowly kind of dies off and then starts coming back in a major way in 2020. I would say early 2020, you start to see the bear market's over. There's something here again, like you see Nifty Gateway picking up, you see CryptoPunks starting to pick up, and then people start creating projects again very heavily, starting right around January 2021. So that's kind of how I see that. But yeah, it was definitely a really kind of interesting journey to kind of navigate. Like, I think many collectors have different opinions on what they will value and what they don't. I definitely have this more open-minded framework of, I think these things fall on a bell curve. So if you're CryptoPunks and you're highly innovative and highly culturally significant, and very early, you're one of those 30 smart contracts in those first 2.5 years there on the timeline, then that's going to be an extremely valuable asset. You're checking a lot of boxes. But I'm not of the belief that, hey, like, okay, you're one of these like, 100 or 200 projects in 2018 that's maybe, innovative in a certain way. Maybe it's not as big as CryptoPunks. Well, CryptoPunks are like multi-billion-dollar market caps. So there can be a bell curve. And this is what you find. The market values, maybe that contract's worth $2 or $3 million instead of $2 or $3 billion, right? But that is, to me, that's a very natural phenomenon that played out. So yeah, that's my thinking around that type of concept.
Yeah, I can only presume the amount of messages you and Adam received over that year or 6 months of people trying to be revived. And I know a lot of them weren't always revived as well. The way, like, if for those who aren't aware, like when you go through the excavation process, first you have to find the contract. Is it verified? Is it not verified? Then you have to find out if anything is even mintable, right? And then if they aren't, then you have to go find the owner of the contract. And that's where all of the craziness that ensued from it. Like when you go out to Ken Irwin's story, who is the creator of Pixel Map, he became a millionaire pretty much over like a month-long period of being helped.
Yep.
And now he's on the My American Life. He has that whole series, or that episode that was just given to him. What about those projects that you didn't give any credence to or any sort of credibility those people who maybe weren't the founder and approached you about a project to help being relaunched? Were there any signs of malicious intent or like scammers who had reached out to you? How did you kind of separate that between this project should be revived or this one has no credibility because I think the people who are reaching out to me may relaunch this with harmful intent to just pretty much dump on anybody? How did you evaluate that?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is absolutely yes. Like every person who has, I don't care if it was like a week old project, was DMing you with some narrative, right? So yeah, I mean, the answer is absolutely everybody is, there's lots of people looking to find historical significance in like a certain project. And I would say for a lot of those, you know, and I still listed them on the timeline because I think they're important. They are NFTs, but there's quite a few there that have major issues with them. So for example, after CryptoKitties exploded, the highest volume project a month later was this project called Crypto Celebrities, where you could basically buy these celebrities. And I remember like seeing that happen. I didn't participate, but it was huge on like Product Hunt. I believe it got released and just went viral for a few weeks. And it was a cool idea. Like you get to own the celebrity. Okay, like Vitalik's going to be worth a ton of money. You know, Obama's going to be worth a ton of money. These like B tier celebrities are worth less. It's an interesting market that forms around it, but it has this fatal issue for a historical collector today, where it's like, we don't want to play like some game of virality for 1 week. You know, we want to collect this iconic asset in this moment in time and hold it for a long time. And that contract has this hot potato functionality where when you buy it, it automatically relists it for, you know, 20% higher or something like that. So and there's a bunch of really cool projects that have that, and it's unfortunate because it makes them essentially, there's essentially no value to a collector because of that. So there was a lot of situations. That's just one example. But remember, you know, a lot of these projects weren't necessarily on ERC 721. That was still a kind of work in progress even after CryptoKitties for many months. So nobody's conforming to like a perfect template for how you'd release a project today. So everybody has all sorts of fun surprises in their contracts, is I guess what we can call them. But to go back to like, was there people with like malicious intent or something necessarily? You know, I was never personally involved with like a rediscovery in the sense that like I was helping like the rediscovery or something like that, sharing revenue or anything necessarily like that. There were other people that were like searching for projects, but for the most part, like I guess Adam's kind of the most notorious person to you know, find a bunch of these contracts and basically do the diligence to make sure that it's not some total disaster scenario. I think people don't quite understand, you know, if you just find a contract and tweet it out 5 minutes later, you know, you're going to have a situation where potentially millions of dollars of people are going to ape into that contract. And then, you know, an hour after that, somebody finds that there was a contract released even before that by like a day or something. And then everybody lost their money. So there's a high level of diligence that needs to go into it. And of course, no like rediscovery is perfect, but there's a high level of kind of scrutiny and diligence that needs to be done before releasing a project to just make sure that people are safe. And there's definitely examples where that didn't happen, or there's some issue, and you can see there's problems that result from that. And I think we can definitely look back and see discoveries where it's like, hey, it would have been really good to know like about this one aspect to it. So there has to be some level of diligence, and that's basically the role that Adam played during that period of time, was like working with the dev and working with the founder, right, to make sure everything's like looking good from his perspective. And I think a lot of people assume that like I was working with Adam or something of this nature, but like, and this is a huge misconception. I was friends with Adam, but like, you know, I find out about projects when they release on his Medium. He's actually extremely fair and thoughtful about, you know, I don't want to share this with people and have this like huge kind of insider trading thing. So it's usually kept like between the pioneer the person who created the contract and maybe like a developer or two or somebody advising, helping out there. And then that person and, like name all of these different projects. Like I did not know. I just definitely was there to ape them when the Medium article got dropped for a lot of these. So yeah, I don't know. Did you have a specific project in mind you were kind of thinking of? I'm happy to kind of shed light on anything really. Feel free to ask whatever comes to your mind.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's two that immediately come to mind. But at first I do want to preface by saying that nothing that ever happens or nothing that's ever built goes with 100% certainty of success. There's always going to be bumps in the road. And obviously the first one that comes to mind is the one that's sitting right here. Because if I remember correctly, you had to put out like, you put your initial thesis out on Terra Nullius, which we now know is actually what's considered an SBT, which Vitalik published about a year after we kind of rediscovered this project. So we're kind of front running the idea of what is going to be a piece or a building block of the Web3 ecosystem here in the future. So just kind of uncovering this during the hype. I want to say this is like during mass hype. Yeah. You're finding the oldest project, it was launched, maybe a month or two after Ethereum went live. I think Ethereum went live the end of July, August. So like literally a few weeks within launch. And you see that there's this claim function. And I don't know if you guys had come across this, but I remember, I know Adam helped build this and there was a wrapper. And then turns out later, the kind of idea was that the wrap token on OpenSea isn't actually wrapping anything because this is an SVG file. And so there's no actual token. It's just like a representation of the underlying. But I know you got caught up in this tailwind. And this is kind of like one of the first moments of where you were kind of being attacked. So if you just kind of want to tell us about the entire experience and then kind of learning the differences between what's considered an old SBT and then the transferable token economy.
Yeah, so this is an example where my thinking has evolved quite a bit, and I, like everyone else, is like, we're faced with all of these kind of new dynamics, right? Of like, okay, is 2018 now something that's considered historical, right? And you have to basically do some kind of quick critical thinking to try to analyze like a framework for thinking about that thing. So specifically for Terra Nullius, I was driving home to my apartment, and I got like a notification. I have like notifications you can turn on for Medium that Adam had posted, basically like an article, right? So I saw that happened. I don't like to like text and drive, so I just like drove home fast and hopped on my computer. I was like, 30 minutes late to the party, I guess you could say. But basically, yeah, like very quickly. Took a look at the contract very quickly, tried to take a look at what this wrapper was, and about within like maybe an hour period, I believe I bought 16 pieces and had I fumbled around for a bit. I thought it would be cool to upload the Bitcoin white paper. So that is engraved into the Ethereum blockchain. For anybody who doesn't know, I'm sure other people have probably done this as well by now. But that was a fun aspect. Anybody can go to the Terra Nullius contract and pull that up, which is kind of just a neat thing. But yeah, and then basically there's this big conversation that starts around, and I think it triggered a very good conversation that needed to happen around what does ownership mean, right? Because this is a really big deal. Does owning a vaulted contract in Emblem Vault, where you're basically wrapping a right on an asset onto another chain and trading that, like, does that mean you own the original one? And the answer is like, well, kind of. Like, the answer is like, yes, you do own a claim on that asset, but it's not like technically it's kind of, there's basically a technical stack that's supporting that from happening, right? And it was similar with Terra Nullius. So, this contract, if you want to go to it, you can just look in the contract and basically see like, okay, there is a claimant, and it basically is storing the address of the person who claims this. I guess like it's debatable to call it a token or not. Like Vitalik did use the word SBT, but these are kind of definitions that are essentially mean different things to different people. But yeah, so there's this piece of, there's a key value pair of this address that's the claimant, and there's this key value pair of what the information you're choosing to store on there is. So people are storing, the word poop. People are storing long Lord of the Rings quotes, like all kinds of crazy stuff, right? People are storing numbers. And basically the aspect that's like obviously a lot of people discussed and that I have definitely evolved my thinking on was there's not a transfer function in the contract. And effectively, unless there's some sort of massive change to the Ethereum protocol that would allow you to somehow, wrap a private, like create a private key and wrap it in a contract and theoretically somehow have some sort of stake in ownership on an SBT, you can't trade an SBT. Like that's the point. It's not meant to be traded. It's meant to show provenance that person engraved this into the blockchain, or that it's locked to that person's wallet forever, right? So that's essentially the lowdown. And I definitely did not understand I did not understand the wrapping contracts. Again, this all happened, I explained in the course of like an hour, and did not understand the wrapping contract fully, like during that hour necessarily. And yeah, basically the strongest argument to be made for Terra Nullius would be that essentially ownership is transferable off-chain. And that's an extremely controversial topic. And actually, I don't really believe that that's got too much support behind it. And that's probably not the future. But the kind of notion is, hey, can you own a token if you can't transfer it? Or can you own a token that is now transferable because it was given permission to be transferred by the person, and we respect some sort of social consensus around that? So long story short, my current thinking is that it's a really cool project, extremely early. Obviously, it's a few days after like the Genesis block. But yeah, I do not consider it an NFT, and I'm working on my V3 timeline now, and I've decided not to include it on the V3 timeline. But yeah, I think it's a cool experiment. I just wouldn't recommend trading on that wrapper. And I wouldn't, I would recommend going to the actual contract and, engraving something for fun on Etherscan, and seeing and looking up what you engraved there by your wallet. That's a pretty cool, kind of novelty thing to do.
And no doubt in my mind that eventually we're going to have a timeline of the history of SBTs or whatever the name of them become. You could just call them non-transferable tokens. It's interesting you mentioned the only way you can trade these is off-chain. The immediate thought that I have is very similar to kind of financial products where there's going to be some sort of engineering in the future I could see around SBTs where you're trading the rights to the token, or people are swapping wallets so that you get their wallet, and people trade different wallets and then change the seed phrase. So there's a handful of ways you can actually change it, but it's not transferring the token to somebody else. It's swapping maybe some sort of like Web2 legal framework, or literally trading wallets with somebody else at the time. But at the time, during mass hysteria, it's really tough to diagnose this because that conversation hadn't really happened before.
Yeah. And, Jake, this is the kind of thing where the historical space is having a conversation yet again, very, very premature to when the rest of the NFT space is going to have it. But like, make no mistake, like these conversations about ownership are going to end up bubbling up and happening on a much broader scale in the NFT space. We often have conversations around royalties. We have conversations around, hey, like, there's a test or a bugged contract that exists prior to the quote unquote official contract. We're having these conversations many months before they bubble up into the mainstream NFT space. And I think that's kind of fascinating that we get to, in our little niche, have these conversations and try to form our opinions and a framework for thinking about these things before the rest of the space does. So by the time like V1 CryptoPunks came around, I was very much, I had very much kind of hardened my thinking around, ultimately these early contracts have collectible value to some people. So I'm of the belief that you should be able to safely and easily trade these and transact these if you like to. And, if you want to put weight on the artist and the creator and on their voice of what they say is official, that's great. That's probably going to be the more valuable one. But I'm against attempts to basically block the transacting of any of these earlier contracts. Like, just kind of basically let a historical nerd collect what historical nerds want to collect. That's my stance.
Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty good interlude into kind of one of the next ideals, which I do want to mention. There's another trend that just happened pretty recently, which we had as a community kind of bubbled up to last December or this April, I should say. So we just had the merge. And then immediately what we saw were people spending 30 ETH on each side of the merge block. Somebody paid 30 ETH, I think, for the last POW NFT. And then somebody paid like 36 ETH for the first proof of stake NFT, right? And calling it historical, right? It's kind of adding these arbitrary ideas, which stem from personal reasoning to these like historical moments. And we kind of had this in the historical space where we first set up this like arbitrary line of what's historical. I believe it was like pre-2018, just because that was kind of where the explosion happened. Yep. And then over time, it kind of moved to 2019, although many people had considered autoglyphs being historical the whole time because of on-chain generation or on-chain generative projects, which is also another debatable thing we could probably talk on for hours. Then it moved to this like kind of bubbling moment with Crypto Skulls, which is your profile picture, right? There was this like, which I think still has the most sales to this day in one day ever. I believe it was like close.
I actually do think it got passed by Other Side. Unfortunately, they eclipsed us, I believe, but at least for historical NFTs, that's probably true.
Yeah, you have 10,236 sales in one day. Absolutely crazy.
That's pretty wild.
It's insane. And I know you kind of got caught up in this hype. I actually had Matt Medved on, and he kind of told me his side of the story, which he's going to actually come on and tell publicly another day. So I kind of know, understanding from a handful of people what actually happened here, but everyone kind of has their own vision of it, because you can view it from, okay, now the goalposts are being moved from 2018 to 2019. Is that actually historical, right? Oh, the guy, one of the leaders in the space had bought, I think you bought like 800 of them at the time, because they were all pre-minted. And then also you had this simultaneous act of Gary V, Matt, and a bunch of other people who had much larger influence in yourself also kind of buying into this hype. And the floor, I believe, went from 0.05 to 4 ETH or something in the matter of a few days. And of course the price is going to deflate, because that happens with literally every NFT. And this added kind of like a very contentious moment for you as a person and a personality and a leader. And then a few months later, in April, we had that infamous Twitter Spaces, which then led to the idea of historical versus vintage, which I think is all kind of important to the growth of our space, because as you mentioned, we're kind of front running everything that's happening in NFTs. And now with the merge of people setting arbitrary historical narratives to pre-POW and now POS, we've had these discussions already because of this moment. So I would just like you to kind of just share your story of what actually happened. I know you've said it a million times, but just once more, because I know a lot of people kind of want to hear it as me and you have this conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I want to preface this with, because you covered a lot of different topics there, but I think specifically on the topic of like what counts as historical, what is going to have this intrinsic collectible value, whereas something else doesn't. I definitely think there was kind of this important moment where it's like, okay, there are different variables that people value differently. So a value that a lot of people share is that age and scarcity through age, right? There's only a certain amount in this year. There's only a certain amount of NFTs on Bitcoin in 2015, yada, yada, right? That that age aspect is an incredibly important piece of the historical narrative. Okay. There's also other reasons why projects are considered like historically relevant or historically significant, right? So, for example, you'll see this play out with CryptoPunks. CryptoPunks are early, but they're also very innovative. So if you innovated in a way that became a very big deal in the future, you can literally trace that innovation through many future projects. People basically reconstruct a timeline of that innovation, and that first one is considered very important because of the innovation it brought to the space. Okay. There's also cultural significance. Okay. So CryptoPunks became very culturally significant, but I would offer the example of Ether Rocks. They are one of these early contracts in 2017. They are not very innovative. They're clip art rocks, but they are pretty culturally significant now, right? They were. I really do. When I think of August 2021, I think of Ether Rocks on CNBC. It's an incredible cultural moment that happened for historical NFTs. So for that reason, I'll simply just kind of point out that viewing things specifically through a lens of age is awesome for many collectors. But I personally, and when I look at the price disparity between the lowest market cap project in 2017 and the highest market cap project, you basically have to put together a framework for why there's that price disparity. And the kind of framework I use is age, cultural significance, and innovation, right? So I think there's a lot of confusion in people maybe having different conceptions of how they value and what these words mean to people. So to me, age is just one aspect of this. And when I personally, like, historical might not even be the best term, but my personal investment thesis is, okay, let's fast forward 10 years. Let's say all of the community dies. Let's say the founders stop, doing concerts and hoodies. What's valuable? What will people look back on from this time and find an intrinsic collectible value in, right? And that's what I want to collect. So I can see the argument for there being 10 years from now, some collectible aspect of being part of a cultural moment with the merge for that. And this is where it gets really messy, because like, I don't think of that in my personal collectability aspect necessarily as historical, but like, would I pay a premium to own that? Yeah, I would. I think probably that narrative has some sort of value 10 years from now, but it's not tied to the age aspect really at all. And that's where the conversation just gets really interesting, because, well, if there's not age involved, is that now a different conversation than historical? The most common thing I hear people say is, hey, Leonidas, like, this project's from 2021, but this project's from 2022, but in 20 years from now, that's historical, right? And I basically have to explain that, like, yeah, it will definitely, if it's still relevant 20 years from now, it's going to have a premium from being old over the assets that are relevant in 2042 that aren't old. There will definitely be a premium there, but that doesn't mean that every project like we see in 2017, for example, no matter if you're a clip art rock, is going to be valuable. You basically hit this point where there are literally over like 1 million smart contracts with NFTs in 2021, 2022. They're not all going to be valuable. Even if we onboard 1 billion people, you basically get to this point where just existing is no longer something that's important because there's so many. And yes, you're pulling up the exact right thing here, right? Like it drastically changes. The big historical moments that I see are the CryptoKitties moment in December 2017. You get a big jump in the increase of number of projects between December 2017 and then around like mid 2020. And then in 2021, it just takes off to an entirely another level. And I don't need to kind of go into details on that. So did you have any follow-up questions on kind of that thinking in that framework before I jump into Crypto Scrolls?
No, I just want to mention from a personal standpoint, I came in as a kind of a vintage maxi. When I first jumped in as somebody who owned an antique store, When Mooncats were called the second oldest NFT on ETH, I was like, holy shit, this is like an iconic moment. And then over time, as more projects became rediscovered, and then the culture started forming around the different projects, it helped me come a little bit more into the moderate role of the importance of cultural significance. And then watching CryptoPunks kind of transcend this even classification of historical NFT. And now it's just like the mainstream iconic kind of idea. Most people, yes, consider them historic, but more people call them iconic, which kind of transcends the idea of historical significance. And then we'll get into next about what kind of happens between the historical versus vintage NFT conversation. But I, for one, also am in the agreement of kind of progressing with your own ideas. Whether you've been persuaded by others or whether you're just curious and want to know what's kind of out there. But then it also becomes wrapped up and convoluted now that this entire tokenized market is also hyper financialized. And that's also a messy area that a lot of people kind of overlook.
No, I mean, yeah, totally. You're making really good points. And it's the kind of thing where I would say we are in basically a price discovery phase still. It's, the market has sent very clear signal about certain things that it values, but I genuinely believe we're like in the first or second inning of NFTs, and we haven't really tapped into the programmatic nature of these smart contracts and the different kind of innovations that'll happen over the next 10 years with the relationship between, people owning NFTs, owning, there's all these crazy ideas, joint owning an NFT, right? Like there's all sorts of things like CryptoKitties with breeding was this really cool concept, combine two NFTs to create another NFT. So I do think the kind of space will continue to evolve. And I am a believer in the fact that, through the cultural significance framework, right? When people are saying iconic, what they're really saying to me is this is culturally significant. This is an iconic piece, the rare Pepe Nakamoto card. This is an iconic, culturally significant asset in addition to its innovation and kind of age and historical value. So yeah, I don't know. That's just kind of my thinking around that.
So then as the controversy around crypto skulls kind of ensues, you're accused of pumping and dumping, but there was also these other variables that were kind of introduced to it. And then I'll kind of lead this conversation to the overall historical versus NFT Twitter spaces that we had, which lasted, I don't even know, 6 hours, which kind of started off on a good foot of conversation and then kind of just divulged into just kind of offensive attacking. And it kind of caused a little bit of this rift and split within the community now, which honestly, even though there was some sort of contention, I think it's very important because now the community is kind of settled after a few months and understood where everybody stands, but then also helped add some additional framework to how to value things based off of kind of which way the herd migrated towards their resolution of kind of like value ascribing.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's good. I think it's important, like on podcasts like this, to kind of cover and dig into like the sort of like kind of drama moments like that. Cause it's like the reality is, historical collectors agree on like almost everything for the most part. We have these differences around certain pieces, can a domain name be considered a collectible? Like these are just, to me, these are extremely tiny differences. We share an extremely similar thesis around valuing these assets. And then when there's a tension between, hey, do we value this or do we value this? Like, what does your framework look like? And how does that hold up to my framework? And let's have this conversation. And the point I've always made and that I believe is really important is that we act with civility, we act with respect, we treat others, the way we would like to be treated when we have these conversations, and try to have objective conversations about the history, and then very, civilly have subjective conversations around our opinions and our frameworks that we've put together for valuing these. And I think that's just super important that we keep improving those muscles and keep trying to improve our ability to, eventually end at a point where, a group of hardcore collectors can come together and have an almost academic style conversation and even make the points of the other side, that's how well the argument is understood. And we're definitely at the point now of like, okay, and this is not anything unique to our space at all. This is a phenomenon in NFTs. This is a phenomenon in crypto. You have these groups of people forming around a network or a community, and they all have incentive alignment, right? And there's this tendency by a lot of people to resort to zero-sum thinking. And basically, instead of accepting that, like, hey, okay, other people have a slightly different framework than me for thinking, you know, I like proof of work, these people like proof of stake. There's a smaller subset of people that go out of their way to attack the other opposing point of view in a somewhat disrespectful manner, rather than having an objective conversation and pointing out the technical merits for proof of work over proof of stake, or vice versa. Like, this is basically, you're not going to find a community on the internet that has incentive alignment by tokens that doesn't have actors that are going out of their way to basically try to tear down other communities, because it's essentially good for their incentive alignment. And it's a very natural phenomenon. This is like Twitter. This is Discord. There's a lot of keyboard warriors out there. So that's just an important thing to keep in mind. And I do think the majority of people are really thoughtful, respectful people who wake up every morning and they're just excited about the day, and they have a more positive outlook on things, and they will have respectful debates and conversations about why proof of work is better. And then there's a lot of people that don't. And ultimately, I think it's better if we can all move in the direction, because I'm yet to see a scenario where just attacking an opposing point of view has ever convinced anybody. In fact, it actually usually makes people double down on their beliefs, because for a variety of reasons. So I'll also preface by saying, I think it's super important that we all are very conscious and aware of just how we're interacting with each other. I think it's a really natural tendency to sit behind a keyboard, and I'm absolutely guilty of this, and attack someone else's, subjective framework for thinking. And I actually think it comes across a lot more powerful if you can do that in a respectful and civil manner. And that's certainly an area that I'm trying to improve in.
We're all guilty of it. And it's funny when we think about kind of the evolution of what transpired afterwards. I might give a quick synopsis before we dive into that Twitter Spaces. Yeah. And I do want to mention that Twitter Spaces actually happened pretty much at the very top of the market. It happened in April, like a week or two before that Luna collapse happened. So if we know anything about top of markets and that kind of like blow off candle, everybody's tension is completely heightened. Whether it's people making a lot of money and they're jealous, or people losing a bunch of money, or people trying to increase their social capital through clout, and there's so many different variables. But what actually happened in going into that April Twitter Spaces, for those who weren't aware, there was a Twitter Spaces. It was called historical NFTs versus vintage NFTs. And I was actually I was on the side of vintage NFTs, and I was actually slightly critical of Leonidas as well, until after hearing some conversations and letting time kind of die down and hearing multiple points of views of what actually happened. So Leo I believe he bought what was like 800 crypto skulls at 0.05 ETH. And then it blew up to 4 ETH. And on the way, Leo was selling some of those after promoting that he said that he found this, the Crypto Skulls collection. And because of the influence, and not just his, but everybody else's, he ended up selling to the amount specifically to making his money back, I believe is what actually happened. And so that led this like whole conversation of Leo being a pump and dumper. But then Leo actually stuck around and helped build the Crypto Skulls DAO. He actually stayed in the community, helped with their companion drop. And so if you look to the degree of most, you call them scammers, they usually just kind of follow the pumps and kind of don't really stick around. And then what happened a few months later, to what we had discussed, Leo's framework was evolving, and there was this infamous tweet, which I'll try to find once Leo is responding, of just like these historical assets. I believe you ended up classifying Avastars as historical, which is from 2020, and then the 2022 project, 8-Bit, which is actually the team that was behind Blockheads, which was a unintentional collection where people could go in 2010 and create these avatars, and people happened to mint them in Namecoin into the Namecoin blockchain in 2014 and 2015, which have sold for under 100 ETH a piece. So he was taking that historical significance and framework and then classified this project as 2022. And then it exploded into this Twitter Spaces where people were trying to decide what is actually historical. Now the credibility of the historical NFT community is being degraded because now we've become a laughing stock because us ourselves within the community doesn't even know what historical means, and it's all a giant pump and dump. And that was kind of like where my framing came from, was the being discredit from the overall NFT and crypto space, because we ourselves as a community don't even know what the true definition is. And now it's come a little bit more to an understanding of where everybody lies. But that Twitter Spaces ended up blasting at, I don't even know, 6 or 7 hours, and had hundreds of people inside. And Leo came in and stood for, I think, the majority of the Twitter Spaces, answering criticism and giving his feedback and thoughts to what actually happened. And some of the criticism was pretty offensive. Some of it was pretty on the point. And from that moment until now, it kind of created this severance of the vintage NFT community, which is kind of like the absolutist, the oldest NFT is the most valuable one, to the more kind of like moderate to historical community is like, hey, we want to value things in a confluence of age, scarcity, innovation, cultural significance, and a handful of aspects. And I don't think without that moment actually happening, whether people lost money or made money is unfortunate or lost credibility. I don't think without that moment we kind of would have got to where we are today, now with some things we'll talk about and the progress of where we've came today.
Yeah, I feel like I guess, do I dive into crypto skulls? There was a lot there.
I'd hope just kind of. I guess, I mean, I've discussed it, and I know you've discussed it at length. Just from your perspective, tell us, like, what happened with the crypto schools thing, and then that tweet with the historical kind of framework, and then that Twitter Spaces. I know that's going to be a long discussion, but just to what you would like to answer to before we can move on to the next topic, because I know without addressing this, and for those who are listening who aren't aware of what happened, I think is an important moment for the historical community, for people to kind of understand where the tribalism lies, kind of where the value lies, and kind of how people that are in the space think differently about different properties.
Yeah. So, okay. So jumping back to January. So it was like, I believe it was January 10th. It was, I believe, like, midnight, 1 a.m. I got a message on Twitter from Medved. I know, like, he's into historical NFTs. We had talked about historical NFTs in the past. The kind of thesis resonates with him. He collects some early projects, right? NFT Now has done an awesome job covering the space. He's a great ally to the historical NFT space, in my opinion. And he just messaged me this project. He's like, had you seen Crypto Skulls before? And it turns out, like, Crypto Skulls were 1 week after where my timeline dropped off. So my timeline went up, my research went up until 1 week before Crypto Skulls in May of 2019. And so basically I, remember a lot of people share projects. So I just go, like, kind of quickly analyze. And I saw in their Twitter banner, it said second 10K BFP. Okay. And there apparently was, like, kind of this idea in the community that they were believing they were the second 10K PFP and an early PFP. So I basically, having done multiple timelines and this research on all of these projects, I was like, wow, like, there's actually, it's kind of shocking. People think that crypto kitties and crypto punks were huge early. No, the answer is, like, crypto punks were kind of irrelevant, honestly, for quite a period of time. PFPs didn't really become popular until much later. And because of that, you essentially don't have many people like creating PFP-based projects in those 2018, 2019 years. It's mostly games, kind of like CryptoKitties. People are playing around with generative art, lots of collectibles, but not PFPs. So yeah, I was like, okay, that's really cool. Like, I think we made this point a little bit before, but it's like, it's not just about age to me. Like if I'm looking at generative art, for example, I'm going to go and there's a generative art timeline that I'm going to reconstruct and try to analyze the historically significant innovative moments on that timeline. And I'll do the same thing for GAN art and AI art NFTs that are now becoming popular. And for example, with the GAN AI art, you're going to find that like, wow, okay, there was no GAN AI art early, and it started with these Lost Robbies, which are this token on the super rare V1 contract in 2018. And then there's this project called Reality in early 2019. And then a few months later, towards, I believe it was October 2019, there's Deep Black. And it's those three projects. So I personally, this is the kind of framework I'm thinking. And I am not just thinking in this giant framework of let's lump every possible NFT together into a giant timeline. Like there's also that way of thinking. But as a collector, I very much value these kind of individual timelines for specific categories and specific areas of NFTs. So for profile pictures, it instantly resonated with me that like, okay, the profile picture timeline, this is the most relevant product. It's reached product market fit in the NFT space by now in 2022. They are the end all be all basically of NFTs at the time. So I was like, okay, this is a project that, I later find that like on the Internet Archive, you can look on the Crypto Skulls website and see in the metadata that, the founder, Alex Slayer, writes that he was inspired by CryptoPunks to create them. So this is just an early example of somebody creating profile pictures and tokenizing them on the blockchain. And as I explained before, there's very much this kind of bell curve type thing where it's not like, oh, you're CryptoPunks and then every other PFP can't have any sort of significance. I definitely believe it follows this bell curve for value. And this early pixel art project from 2019 in the middle of the bear market, before this crazy 2021 boom, I was like, this is pretty cool. There are like 4,000 of them listed starting at 0.04 ETH. And I was like, okay, like I'm going to go buy some of these. And I believe, unfortunately, because this was, again, if you're listening to this in the future, we paid a lot for gas back in the day. So if you wanted to sweep NFTs, you're going to probably be spending more money in gas than you were on the actual NFT. So I ended up spending, I believe, around 250,000 in USD. It's hard to convert to ETH at the time, but like, 90 ETH or something like that. To acquire 888 of them. I actually went in trying to acquire 1,000. And note at the time, I had gotten this message. I hadn't replied to Medved. I hadn't messaged or communicated with anybody about this. I just was like, okay, this is cool. I'm gonna, take a position in this, right? Move a percentage of my money into this. Small percentage. It was not like this massive high conviction thing. I think people get confused by big numbers and stuff, but it's like, this was not me making some like massive play. I thought it was really cool, so I moved some money into it, but this was not me, putting all my net worth like into a CryptoPunk and a founder of CryptoKitty in a year before, right? So I bought some of these and I was trying to get to 1,000, and I realized while I was buying that a bunch of other people were starting to purchase as well. And remember, these did not mint out. So it was this weird thing where Alex Slayer had created all 10,000 and listed them for sale on OpenSea, thinking that that would be a more attractive way to mint them at the time. This was, again, before it became popular to just follow this standard framework for whitelisting and mints. So I just went and bought, tried to buy 1,000. And it turns out that what had happened was, because, again, instantly the whole thing sells out. I can't reach my 1,000. I'm on Genie trying to just buy 1,000, and that fails because they've all sold out. So I'm like, what the hell just happened? So it turns out that, basically there's a combination of two things to my understanding. There's basically groups of people. And again, being in the historical NFT space, like I was kind of naive. Like we live in this parallel universe. I wasn't really following and aware. I wasn't minting new projects, so wasn't really aware that this kind of thing necessarily happened. But basically, there's alpha groups that they have tools where they sit in Discord and they monitor the volume of different projects across the NFT marketplaces to see, okay, like there's something here. If people are putting money behind it, maybe I should go check this out, right? So I was just buying a bunch of crypto skulls, and these people saw them and were like, okay, well, there's a lot of volume here. Let's go pick some of these up. And that starts kind of this kind of spiral. And then also Gary Vee tweeted about them, asking if this second 10K PFP thing is true. Remember, again, I hadn't tweeted or communicated with anybody at the time. And essentially, if you don't know, like Gary Vee is the founder of VeeFriends. He owns a ton of CryptoPunks and is very large and placing large bets in the NFT space for a long time. Pretty respected dude. And when he really basically does anything about a project, a lot of people pay attention. And basically within about 20 minutes or 30 minutes, they all sell out. All 4,000 that had been listed by the founder sell out. And the price jumps to like 0.4 ETH, right? And this is like, I'm like, what the hell just happened? And I ended up replying to Gary Vee, basically saying on Twitter, and you can probably pull it up. I don't know exactly. It's somewhere on Twitter. It was just basically me saying like, yes, I looked at these and believe that the second 10K PFP claim looks like it probably checks out. And to this day, I think that it probably still does have like very good merit, but it's ultimately probably not. I moved away from like all of these, like we're the first art NFT, we're the first this. I have moved towards more just this thinking of, there's a timeline of music NFTs. It's cool that you were the first audio NFT. It's cool that you were an early music NFT. But what I really care about is like, okay, what are the experiments on blockchains to own collectible pieces of music and audio over the last 10 years on any chain? And I want to own those moments in time. I want to own pieces of those innovations and those experiments. So basically that's essentially how that kind of got started. And Crypto Skulls ends up just going crazy viral over the next 24 hours. I mean, it's basically like this Black Swan event. So I end up selling about 25% of my Crypto Skulls. This is the kind of thing like has never happened to me like this before. I'm like, I should definitely, and this is a moment where it's like, okay, I'm an influencer on Twitter now, so it's a little bit different. But I always encourage people, like if you buy something and 30 minutes later it goes up 10x, like, and granted, remember, like I had not tweeted about it or talked to a single soul about it, and this happens, I'm going to start selling some to make my money back. That seemed like an extremely logical thing to do and not something I really thought too much about. And I think basically what ends up happening is over like the next 24 hours, or I think it was like maybe 2 or 3 days total, this craziness where it's similar to any viral thing. It was the NFT of the week. And it was really cool. And a huge, awesome thing happened where it brought light and brought a bunch of attention to historical NFTs. And I, to this day, talk to a ton of people who got turned on to historical NFTs, and they're still, collecting rare Pepes, and they got down the rabbit hole from that moment where they, for the first time, it clicked to them like, wow, like maybe instead of just like buying these new mints and trying to flip them, you can buy these assets and hold them. And yeah, I basically ended up selling about 25% of them to make my money back. I actually made a profit. At the time, I believe I got an extra $200,000, which seemed kind of reasonable. I sold 25% of them. The plan is to hold the rest for a long period of time. So what I ended up doing actually is the next day I sell my CryptoPunk, buy more Crypto Skulls. I'm very convicted on this idea. Like I'm seeing a lot of just people not understanding the dynamics of why collectors value something, and I'm willing to place a bet on that. So yeah, over the next couple of days, it ends up going to 5 ETH. I believe it was like the highest 4.8 ETH or something like that. And I did not sell any over 1.1 ETH, right? I was holding roughly $8.5, $9 million of Crypto Skulls. Could have definitely sold, but yeah, I basically I wanted to have a long-term hold here. I had made my money back, and like I was happy with that. So I actually, yeah, I mean, you kind of alluded to this, but basically over the last 6 months, I ended up writing the skull paper, the white paper for our DAO, which is basically this governance process that we run the community by. And I've sat as a member on the Skull Council for several months now. And we have gotten to deploy like $50,000 to community initiatives. We've gotten to do some really fun stuff. And I've given back over 54 crypto skulls. I've given away 54 crypto skulls to the community. I've donated about $40,000 total to help support initiatives. And I don't want to get, I could talk about this forever. I don't want to go too deep in the weeds here, but the founder, Alex, lives in Russia and he doesn't speak English very well. So we have to talk to him with a translator. And there's kind of this complex aspect of how do we run this decentralized community? And I wanted to help bootstrap that. So it was basically donating these skulls and ETH at the time to help bootstrap that effort and get that off the ground. I wanted to see this community successful. And yeah, I mean, it's really cool. To this day, there's a vibrant community. We did a Twitter space 2 days ago. We got featured on the front page of OpenSea on that September 20th 5-year anniversary of Peter Shirley's ERC 721. And it's been really fun. There's a lot of things to get into there, but that's essentially my side of the story. And if people want to kind of make claims that I was pumping and dumping per se, yeah, basically my answer to that is like, listen to the full story and, you can come to your own conclusions. But ultimately, like I said, I sold 25% of my skulls, ended up selling my punk, bought back a lot more, donated a large amount to the community, could have sold a lot more at 10 million, did not do that, and have held till now. And ultimately, I think basically there's just this lack of transparency in the space where people's assumption is that I'm behind the scenes coordinating some idea where we're just going to pump the heck out of these crypto skulls and then sell a bunch of them. And that is not at all what happened. And I think it's not, that's not fair to say that happened when I'm the person in this story. Like I know for a fact that is not what happened at all. And yeah, I mean, I would definitely, there's lessons learned about, being an influencer, and maybe the reality is like, you literally can't buy and sell anything. Right. Like that's like somewhat of a lesson. And I actually haven't sold an NFT in the last 8 months, just kind of because it's like, I think people were thinking that, maybe this is like my kind of strategy and this kind of thing, but it's like, I really like, if you look at my entire portfolio, I'm buying and holding for a long period of time. And yes, there are moments where I will make my money back when you have some like crazy 10x event, or I think it ended up being like a 100x event like that happening. But I ended up taking some profits at around like the 10x point. And, I personally don't see any issue with that, but I can understand how people without the ability to kind of see the entire picture are just going to basically see a tweet on Twitter, jump to conclusions, pile on top of this. There's this whole aspect of this pre-mint that people just don't understand. They're seeing Alex selling these skulls, thinking he's like quote unquote dumping on the community. The reality is the dude's doing the exact opposite. He donated 1,500 crypto skulls to the DAO. It's an incredibly generous thing to do. He also didn't sell any skulls above 1 ETH. So yeah, ultimately, when the mainstream NFT space is getting met with this kind of foreign concept of, hey, earlier NFTs are valuable. It's not just about, which VC backed you, who's the founder, how sick was the party at NFT NYC. There's a totally different lens to look at collecting these assets, and they see that, and it's this foreign kind of concept. And the initial reaction is like, hey, I don't understand why these are like all of a sudden 1 ETH or 2 ETH or 3 ETH. And a lot of people kind of form opinions. And fortunately, I think, a lot of people just move on to the next thing the next week. They're essentially there playing this like a slot machine. This is kind of like Las Vegas, essentially. I know you're in Vegas. Vegas is super fun, but it's very different, I would say, than what we do in the historical space, right? We're placing these long-term bets. And I think that's it was a moment where we got to onboard a bunch of people, which was like super cool. And to this day, there's many collectors who are very into historical NFTs because of that moment. So I think there's pros and there's cons. If you can go back in time, it's like you might do things a little differently, but I definitely stand by my actions and don't really think that anything was really done very wrong there. It's like there was significant issues with, if you compare it to a modern mint, of course, this is very different because there's like thousands of these tokens pre-minted by the dev, and he's just trying to sell them. They haven't sold out for 3 years. So you're seeing all these things and forming opinions. But the reality is the intentions were good by every actor I've talked to about this and everybody involved in this. And ultimately, there's basically dynamics with older NFTs that you don't see in newer NFTs because we now have this very clear template for how to kind of step through this process. There's people writing Medium posts on how to launch an NFT. There's like 1,000 of these, right? This was not the case in 2019 when Alex released Crypto Skulls. And there's a lot of aspects to pretty much every historical contract where you have to do your own research and understand like, hey, like, why does the developer still hold 4,000 of these? Like, the answer wasn't that he's like trying to scam everybody. That was definitely not the answer. So yeah.
No, yeah.
That's my lowdown there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now that we can kind of like put that to rest, I do want to show one final tweet from you, which was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, essentially, before that Twitter Spaces happened. And we don't have to talk about it too much because this post then, because of Crypto Skull's explosion, started this idea of the early 10K PFP movement. Some people believe in it, some people don't. And because of that, and because of this tweet, started that conversation of historical NFT versus vintage NFT. Because some of these collections are from 2022, some are from 2017, right? This one's from 2014. And kind of course, then the conversation is what is actually a PFP and a bunch of these other conversations. Right. And now 4 or 5 months later, we've been able to kind of figure out where everyone stands and what the definitions are and kind of where the majority leans, which not everyone has to lean into it. But for those that are listening, I show this because kind of setting the timeline of what's happened over the last 18 months. And, historical NFTs are awesome, but just as every community, not even just in the crypto space, or not even just in the historical NFT space, but in the crypto space and the financial market and everything, there's also some very contentious issues and moments that happen. And that's kind of how we progress, right? We could have easily, as a community, kind of just folded and called it a day and said it's all a scam. But now today we're growing, and there's a very kind of elegant movement that's been happening. People have been building a various handful of tools and products that are going to be very big for our community. And so one thing you've been working on is actually NFT history, which is basically a Wikipedia for historical NFTs, which is contributed by the community. And then up until about, what was this, yesterday or 2 days ago from the time of this recording, a zero fee NFT, a historical marketplace, or more of like an aggregate at this point in time, which is something we've all been trying to put together for quite some time. And I believe there's somebody else who's doing it, and there'll probably be a handful that pop up over time. But so tell us a little bit then, continuing on the timeline from those moments of April, and I guess just all through the bear market, settling down and then deciding on this is where you want to put your focus on in the historical community. Why a Wikipedia page, and how do you plan on building from here on out?
Yeah, it's a great question. So to kind of go back and preface, like, yes, I am personally like investing my money in historical assets because I very much believe in that thesis and believe it will play out well over time. Like there's absolutely that like kind of financial aspect. But on top of that, there's this entirely different aspect of like, people are drastically focusing during this bull market on the financial side. And yeah, the financial side's super fun. There's like, again, it's kind of like Las Vegas on the internet. Like that's really cool that you can speculate on these assets, but there's a much deeper layer that needs to kind of get established, right? Where, quite literally the Larva Labs website for many years said, we're the first NFT, we're the first non-fungible token. CryptoPunks are the first. And, they were forced in, I believe it was January 2021 to change that slightly towards saying we're the first non-fungible token on Ethereum. And then later, based on the pressure from the historical community, that was changed to, they got rid of the wording, right? So the bottom line is, this is like a super easy thing. Anyone can go spend 5 minutes and determine, hey, CryptoPunks are not the first non-fungible token. But at the time, there was a huge lack of information, right? People are trying to figure out what's valuable. People are trying to figure out the history in real time. And that was an incredible moment. The market's in price discovery, it's craziness, it's insanity. I would much rather the next, crypto NFT bull run to have resources and infrastructure built to help make the history a lot more clear, right? And specifically, we're talking about the wiki here. The wiki is one piece of the puzzle. I ultimately, the idea behind NFT history is it's basically a platform to educate millions of people about the origin story of NFTs, educate people about NFT history. The literacy right now is, to be completely frank, it's abysmal. The majority of people believe like Bored Ape Yacht Clubs are the oldest, or some people, go back and they can talk to you about Mooncats and maybe, maybe one or two other projects in CryptoPunks. But I think the history is very nuanced. There's a lot of aspects to it. The hardcore collectors understand this. And unless you spend a lot of time to kind of understand it and go to these many different sources to try to form opinions and understand the history, it's very difficult. So one piece of the infrastructure to that I'm building, and that, I say I'm building, it's like, yes, I set up the site, but the idea here is it's an open source initiative is the goal for it, where anybody in the historical space can come and add and share information. Wikipedia has been notoriously bad and not very kind to not just historical NFT people, but NFT people in general. It's kind of insane that Art Blocks isn't allowed to have a Wikipedia page. Like, that makes no sense to me at all. So the idea behind this is, have a place to just very similar to Wikipedia, document the history of NFTs and kind of form that history around certain collections. So that's how the history is organized, and it's based on the on-chain creation date of a collection. And then when a community member writes these articles, I will go in and edit them and put them on the homepage. And we've got 7 so far. It's really cool. Like Wabi, who's an awesome member in the historical community, wrote this article, and there's a bunch of articles in progress. You're planning on writing a Mooncats article. I know it's really cool to see people coming together and rallying around this. And I'll love to see over the next year or two, hopefully this kind of get populated with hundreds of early projects and kind of end in a point where it's like, it's not even a question of like, what happened here? What's this? Like, this is the credible source that you can drop a link to in a conversation on Twitter and saying like, no, like, I think it's, I can understand like why you kind of thought that, or maybe you weren't informed, but here's the very detailed history that, Howard's references, and, points to things, the way a historical collector is going to think about them and how kind of objectively that history is being interpreted. So that's the idea here. Have a credible source for people to kind of get pointed to learn about the history of these assets.
I'm super glad that you've begun building this. There are a handful of other good tools. For those that don't know, oldnft.com is a very good one. This one's a little bit more based around infographics and a little bit more visually stimulating, because we know that everybody learns through different dynamics. Some people prefer video, some people prefer plain text, some people prefer pictures. But now we're starting to see all of these tools beginning to populate and flourish, which is absolutely incredibly amazing, because the whole thesis, as we've discussed through this entire conversation about historical NFTs is the idea of storytelling, right? The trend right now, and we saw the meme, I think Thread guy started it, was storytelling NFTs because he's associated with the project escapes my name. But we've had storytelling NFTs literally since the entire history of NFTs and crypto, right? So it's like, again, where the community is kind of front running these different narratives. It's just once we have this up and this has been fortified and established, kind of the arbitrage disappears, right? We come in and you can make that 100x or 1000x. You could come in and buy a CryptoPunk at the very beginning, an alien punk for free, claim it for free, and then sell it for $27 million. That's the arbitrage because the information is very limited. But now, once we have this, whether it's the next bull run or we just need more established tools, then the interest increases and then more liquidity flows to the market. But then it becomes a little bit more organized. It's a more efficient market, and whether that takes a few years or many years, we know, and we started seeing this recently of a bunch of money flowing back into historical NFTs. More specifically, Rare Pepes has seen a lot of traction recently because of the iconic status of Rare Pepe. And then you have Fake Rares, which is kind of a build on the original idea. But now you and also Shots started your own marketplaces built kind of off of the same tool, which I believe is an aggregate. Tell us a little bit about how you put this together. Is this marketplace going to be something that competes with OpenSea, or is it just something to kind of help it become more efficient and gain momentum for something to come later?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So, another piece of this infrastructure that I think is like super important going into the future that like we're definitely going to need, like it needs to happen, in my opinion. It is a marketplace a dedicated marketplace experience for historical collectors and the different things that we care about. There's, just very specific things that are unique to us that other collectors may be buying a doodle on the floor of OpenSea. Like that's just not something they necessarily need. So the analogy I would give is, you don't go into Walmart to buy a Van Gogh, right? You shouldn't go into OpenSea to buy your historical NFTs. You're basically not being surfaced any of the information that you need. And on top of that, they're charging this kind of ridiculous take rate of 2.5%, right? And there's these royalties on top of it. And for this reason, you end up seeing this very high percentage of trades and market activity in the historical space being over the counter, right? And over the counter, like I don't need to point out to you, like, there's people getting scammed every week. It's like, it's not a super ideal situation. It works great for the really kind of serious collectors who have credibility and have been doing this for years. But, I don't think that scales to the next million people, right? You do need a marketplace where the experience is dedicated to collecting early NFTs and surfaces the information that you care about and allows you to filter based on how a historical collector wants to filter. And there's a lot of other ideas I have for that. But yeah, ultimately, a zero fee marketplace with the idea where you can optionally tip a royalty if you want to. Like this is, I think, the kind of future the entire NFT space is probably heading into. You've seen the ENS community build their own marketplace with ENS Vision that's actually built on this same reservoir platform that I'm building on top of. So yeah, I mean, it's ultimately it's been really cool having like an OpenSea and this like centralized Amazon type marketplace. But it's very unlikely to me that the future of a mature NFT market is 2.5% fees and 10% royalties. You can argue if that's good or bad. Ultimately, with ERC20 tokens and currencies, you very quickly see that market mature and you've ended up with around a 0.25% take rate. This is where NFTs head. That's just the reality. I think artists really need to be thoughtful around thinking about their long-term business models and being proactive, because I think the royalty thing, it's definitely becoming a kind of hot topic conversation. And I'm seeing all these platforms popping up that aren't honoring royalties. And I think the kind of happy medium, specifically in the royalty category, to end up with is I don't think platforms should be getting in the way of collectors and artists and collectors trading with each other. I don't think it's the platform's job to enforce these kind of social contracts. I think it ultimately is up to the collectors and the artists to enforce those social contracts, because these aren't things that are enforced on chain. So it is a social type of situation. And I think the ability to optionally say, hey, I'm gonna tip the artist, I'm gonna do this royalty, that's a really awesome thing. And I actually think most people will actually end up doing that, especially if it's an artist or a community they really care about, and that can be a social norm. And I think that's a better outcome than just like, hey, there's no fee, there's no royalties at all. But in the meantime, you see in the historical space, any sale over $100,000 is very likely happening off of OpenSea because of this. So there's a huge need for lower fees. This is zero fees. Shots is doing zero fees. Like I think ENS Vision is about 0.5% fee. So much lower fees and a dedicated experience. And yeah, this NFT history market, it's just like the MVP. If you've read Lean Startup, it's basically like the Bible in Silicon Valley. You create a product and you get it to market as quickly as possible and test out to see if it's something that people are actually even interested in. You don't raise a ton of money, build something that nobody actually wants. So the idea is this is just essentially this like V1 of the marketplace. All the smart contracts are done by Reservoir, and they've been audited by like Artblocks is using them. G Money's using them. I believe Coinbase just did an audit of their smart contracts. So I'm not having to take on this insane kind of task of making a highly secure NFT marketplace from the smart contract level, but I get to build on top of a platform and do what I care about, which is creating the user experience around collecting historical NFTs. And that's the kind of idea behind the market there, but very early days with that.
Yeah, very, very, very early, especially when you're just a one-man crew at the moment. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a bunch of competition. I do believe ENS is 1.5%, so it's all trickling down to zero. Royalties are interesting because those who don't know, royalties were on the marketplace level are actually first introduced through a historical NFT project called Dada Creeps and Weirdos back in 2017. And it's interesting because when you look at the history of marketplaces, you see that a lot of the pre-ERC 721 tokens all had their own individual marketplace, all hosted on their own webpage. And then OpenSea came and bundled everything together for the ERC 721 standard. And now, as you mentioned, OpenSea is pretty much like a Walmart, and some of these communities are growing too big to be kind of put in the corner at Walmart, and they need specific requests, necessities, and also they just want to be treated a little bit better. So now OpenSea is beginning to be unbundled, just as OpenSea bundled up the market a few years ago. And ENS has done this. We're starting to see even individual collections. I know Truth Labs with Goblin Towns creating their own marketplace pretty soon. You obviously have the standard, which everyone wants to try to get to, which is the original Larva Labs CryptoPunks marketplace with 0% royalties.
They got it right the first time, Jake. That's all we needed.
That's all they needed. Yeah. But now where royalties are, I kind of see it is royalties are socially enforced, right? You need to have your customers or your community want to contribute that royalty or have an incentive, right? You could create a bunch of social dynamics that are integrated into a marketplace that are going to encourage people to want to pay that 1% royalty because they either get some social clout or they get additional benefits and they're not feeling like they've been just ripped off by OpenSea. Eventually, we'll see what eventually happens. Probably going to take some years for it all to kind of dwindle down to a pretty novel number. So I'm kind of interested to see what happens with that with the marketplaces. And again, that'll probably be another timeline that somebody in our community will put out as the history of marketplaces and how they all started at 0, went up to 10%, and then right back down on the individual level. So I know we've been talking about the about this all for a while. We finally got to sit down and put this whole timeline together of Leonidas, our industry, and kind of where we're going. And now we're seeing more interest. We have more leaders, which is highly encouraging. And before we get out of here, is there any words or any thoughts about what you see happening within our community, we'll say, over the next year during this bear market?
Yeah, I think my vision is pretty clear. Let's build the infrastructure that we need, right? We need educational tools. We need credible sources of truth. We need marketplaces that support us. We need to work on just fostering a community that's inviting and positive and that people want to spend their time in. That's what I'm doing with the Discord. It's private at the moment, but the idea is eventually open up and have a historical Discord with, run similarly to how a lot of these super, I would just call them wholesome communities are, right? Go into the Crypto Cards Discord. It's a really great culture that they've fostered there. Go into the On-Chain Monkey Discord. It's just a really, Danny's making a very specific decision to prioritize culture and welcoming new people over having these kind of cutthroat debates and conversations where people are being maybe disrespectful to each other. And, I would much rather the historical space. This is absolutely no shade at all in the CryptoPunks community, but I would much rather the historical space grow up to be accepting and welcoming to new people and not being, kind of elitist assholes a little bit. I would really hate to see everybody in this current age who's bought historical NFTs, they're holding them 10 years from now, they go up a lot. And, everybody has done really well and we've all turned into kind of jerks, right? And we look down on other people. And there's something deep inside of me that kind of resents looking down on someone else. Maybe they could only afford to buy a lower priced NFT from, 2017 or something, but you're no better than that person because you hold some $1 million project or something like that. And I would just encourage people to stay humble, be respectful to each other, work on having conversations that, ultimately where you're hoping the best answer kind of comes out of that. And there's a product that ultimately results in kind of the truth coming out and winning, and just being respectful and treating other people nicely. I just see there's many internal dynamics in all of crypto, and I would love for us to try to set an example for what a more wholesome community where you kind of join and people feel like they're friends with each other and bond around this shared reverence for these early assets. So love is the answer. Spread positive vibes and just be respectful of one another. I think, I can't highlight that enough.
Foster a good culture and a good community. Couldn't have said it any better. Leo, thank you for doing this. It's been a long time in the making. I'm excited to share this here in the near future. And I hope that everybody enjoyed this conversation. And thank you guys for coming and watching. We'll see you next time.
It's been awesome, Jake. Thanks. Peace.
See ya.